The shimmering luxury of the Aquatlantis resort, a submerged glass palace, promised an oceanic utopia. But among the artificial corals and the breathtaking view of the abyss, chilling whispers spread. An ethereal figure, the lady of the underwater castle, haunted its corridors, draining peace and technology. Was it the echo of a centuries-old tragedy or an ingenious hoax in the depths? Mystery Inc. was called to unveil the aquatic veil, where ghosts and technological failures intertwined, and the truth was as unattainable as the treasure at the bottom of the sea. The salty breeze of Santa Monica was a pleasant contrast to the air conditioning in the Mystery Incorporated office, where the phone rang incessantly. Fred, with his unshakable optimism, answered, and the voice on the other end sounded almost hysterical. It was Mr. Bartholomew Higgins, owner of the newly opened Aquatlantis Resort, a colossal undertaking that promised an unparalleled luxury experience 100 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Higgins' initial enthusiasm had turned to panic, and his reports were hair-raising. "It's her ghost, I swear. The lady of the underwater castle." Higgins practically screamed over the phone. "Ever since we opened, the apparitions began. System failures, doors opening by themselves, lights flickering. My guests are terrified. And the figure is unmistakable, identical to the portraits of the former owner of Blackwood Castle, which sank here centuries ago." Velma, her lenses gleaming under the sunlight streaming through the window, already had her tablet in hand, researching. Blackwood Castle. Ah, yes. A medieval fortress that, according to local legends, mysteriously sank during a storm in 1650, taking with it its lady, Lady Eleanor Blackwood. They say she was an inventor ahead of her time, but also an eccentric recluse. Shaggy, who until then had been distracted with Scooby in an imaginary battle against a giant cracker, gulped. "Ghost? Like, a real ghost? With chains and everything?" Scooby, his eyes wide, nodded vigorously, already imagining a ghost eating his Scooby snacks. Daphne, always practical, pondered, "A luxurious underwater resort. It's a prime target for anyone who wants to cause trouble or even sabotage a successful business." Fred, with a determined smile, slapped the table. "Looks like we have a new mystery, gang. Pack your bags, we're diving deep to find out who's behind this ghost of the underwater lady." The trip to the California coast was punctuated by Scooby and Shaggy devouring giant sandwiches and Velma delving into technical reports about the Aquatlantis resort. She discovered that the resort was a marvel of modern engineering, with state-of-the-art pressurization, air purification, and energy systems. The construction cost had been astronomically high, which made it even stranger that something so technologically advanced was supposedly being haunted by a 17th-century ghost. Upon arriving at the port, they were greeted by a visibly shaken Mr. Higgins, with deep dark circles under his eyes and an expression of despair. He led them to an elevator that looked more like a space capsule. "Welcome, to my nightmare," he murmured, as the capsule began its descent, and the sunlight gave way to a deep, mesmerizing blue. The pressure subtly increased, and through the windows, the underwater realm revealed itself. Vibrantly colored fish swam past, and the outline of the resort became clearer, an imposing structure of steel and glass, almost organically blending with the seabed. It looked like a giant aquarium, where humans were the fish on display. Inside the resort, the air was climate-controlled, and the silence was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the life support systems. The corridors were vast and illuminated, with panoramic ocean views in all directions. It was a place of stunning beauty, but the aura of fear was palpable. The few employees they encountered seemed exhausted and frightened. "She always appears at night," Higgins explained, guiding them down one of the long glass corridors. "A pale, translucent figure, floating, and when she passes, everything fails. The security cameras freeze, the lights flicker, and even the air conditioning seems to choke." Velma, however, didn't seem convinced. Her eyes scanned the control panels and visible systems. "System failures, that sounds more like an overload or interference than a ghost, Mr. Higgins. Is there some kind of control center for all these systems? Higgins hesitated. Yes, on the lowest level. But it's a restricted area, for technical personnel only. While Velma was engrossed in her technical observations, Scooby and Shaggy had already sniffed their way to the submerged cafeteria. Their eyes widened at the variety of gourmet snacks displayed on sparkling platters. Giant shrimp, fresh lobsters, elaborate sushi, and mountains of colorful sweets. "Scooby, look at this!" Shaggy exclaimed, his mouth full of a salmon canopy. "It's like snack paradise." They began to devour everything they could reach, while Fred, Daphne, and Velma continued to investigate. Velma made some notes about the ventilation systems and wiring, noticing some anomalies. Fred, meanwhile, began to mentally map the resort, identifying the points where the supposed apparitions had been most frequent. Daphne talked to employees, trying to gather more information about the incidents. "Some say they feel an inexplicable chill when she appears," a maid said, her voice trembling. "Others, that they hear whispers in an ancient language." Suddenly, a scream echoed down the corridor. It was Shaggy's. "Zzzzzzzzzombie." The team rushed to the cafeteria, and what they saw made even Velma pause for a second. A large piece of sushi, which had been untouched on the table, now floated in the air, spinning slowly, as if manipulated by an invisible force. Scooby was hiding behind Shaggy, who looked about to faint. Did you see? The flying sushi?" Shaggy stammered, pointing a trembling finger. Fred approached the floating sushi, skeptical. This is new. A hungry ghost, perhaps." Velma, however, had already noticed something. A small and almost imperceptible translucent line that seemed to be connected to the sushi and disappeared into the ceiling. She leaned in, her eyes focused. "Or maybe, it's not a ghost." Before she could examine it more closely, the sushi fell with a thud, and the cafeteria lights began to flicker frantically. A sepulchral silence filled the air, and then, a translucent, ethereal figure, dressed in ancient attire, floated into the cafeteria entrance. Her eyes seemed to emit a greenish glow. It was the lady of the underwater castle. Scooby and Shaggy let out a simultaneous scream and ran to hide under a table, knocking over trays and cutlery in the process. The figure slowly floated towards them, and the temperature in the environment dropped drastically. Fred, with his trap in mind, whispered to Daphne, "Quick, we have to follow the figure. She must be leading us to the source of the problem." Velma, however, had an intrigued expression on her face, observing the figure closely. "No, wait. There's something strange about her movement. It's not organic. It's programmed." The figure then turned and floated towards an adjacent corridor, which led to a darker, less frequented area of the resort. Fred, Daphne, and Velma followed her, while Scooby and Shaggy, trembling, dragged themselves out from under the table, looking back with every step. The ghostly figure led them through a series of labyrinthine corridors, always keeping a distance, as if luring them. With each turn, the lights flickered more intensely, and the air seemed to grow even colder. Finally, she stopped in front of a heavy metal door, which seemed to be the entrance to a maintenance area. The figure extended her translucent hand towards the door, and it creaked, slowly opening. Inside, the darkness was almost complete, and the air seemed denser. The figure then dissolved into a greenish mist, disappearing completely. The door slammed shut, and the lights went out entirely, leaving the team in the deepest darkness of the ocean. Fred. I think the ghost locked us in here." Daphne whispered, her voice filled with apprehension. Fred fumbled on the wall. "Don't worry, guys, there must be a circuit breaker somewhere." Velma, however, was tense. "It's more than that. My tablet signal disappeared completely. It seems like we're in a Faraday cage. Or something even more elaborate." A muffled click was heard, and a red emergency light flickered on the ceiling, revealing the silhouette of ducts, pipes and complex equipment. The hum of the systems was louder there, and a metallic smell hung in the air. Zoinks! I don't like the dark, Scooby. Shaggy whispered, hugging the dog tightly. Scooby let out a whimper. Then, a metallic, dragging sound came from the darkness. It sounded like chains being dragged across the floor. And with each second, the sound got closer and closer. What was that? Daphne asked, her voice almost inaudible. Fred turned on his cell phone's flashlight, and the beam of light revealed something even more terrifying. A huge, shapeless shadow moved in the darkness, with something that looked like a metallic claw dragging across the floor. It was much larger than the translucent figure they had seen before. GGGGGGG ghost. Scooby and Shaggy screamed in unison, and without a second thought, turned and blindly ran through the darkness, bumping into pipes and boxes. Wait! It's not a ghost! Velma exclaimed, but it was too late. Scooby and Shaggy had already disappeared into the darkness. The red emergency light began to flash even faster, and the metallic sound intensified, revealing an even more grotesque figure, now closer. It was tall and slender, with long, thin arms that ended in sharp claws. It seemed to be made of twisted metal, and its eyes glowed with a malignant light. It dragged itself towards them, emitting a hissing sound. Well, gang, Fred said, gulping, looks like our ghost has a friend, and he doesn't look very friendly. The hissing sound of the metallic monster approached, and panic set in. Daphne cowered, while Fred, despite the tension, tried to remain calm. Velma, on the other hand, was more intrigued than frightened. Her eyes fixed on the creature's details as the red emergency light illuminated it in intermittent pulses. It's robotic, Velma murmured, more to herself. The movements are too precise. And the frame, it seems to be made of some type of submarine alloy. Fred tried to open the door, but it was locked from the outside. Darn it! Someone locked us in here on purpose. The metallic creature advanced, its claws dragging across the floor with a screeching sound. The smell of ozone and burnt metal hung in the air. Scooby and Shaggy, who had disappeared into the darkness, reappeared for a brief moment, running in circles and screaming, before vanishing again down another corridor. Fred, Daphne, we have to hide. Velma warned, realizing the creature wouldn't stop. They squeezed behind a pile of maintenance boxes, as the creature passed, emitting a mechanical hum. The noise of its claws on the metal floor was deafening. It seemed to be looking for something, or perhaps for them. We need a plan, Fred whispered, looking at the complex layout of the room. If it's a robot, it must have a weak point. Velma nodded. We need to find the power source. Or the control center. And for that, we need light. Daphne, using her cell phone's flashlight, pointed to a control panel on the opposite wall, a few meters away. Look! It looks like the main circuit breaker. But between them and the panel was the metallic creature, which was now slowly turning, its red eyes glowing in the darkness. It seemed to have sensed their presence. Ruro! Scooby and Shaggy suddenly emerged from behind a large duct, running desperately towards the group. They were panting, their eyes wide with terror. You won't believe it. Shaggy squeaked. There's an army of them in there. Mini-robots. And they're chasing us. As if to confirm his words, a series of small mechanical noises could be heard. Dozens of small robots, like metallic insects, began to emerge from the shadows, crawling across the floor and walls, all converging on their position. It's an ambush! Daphne exclaimed. Fred quickly assessed the situation. Okay, Daphne, Velma, we need a distraction. Scooby, Shaggy, you're with me. Let's go to the control panel. Shaggy choked. Us? But, Fred, we're the masters of escape, not distraction. Trust me. Fred insisted, pulling a screwdriver from his pocket. Velma, when I signal, shut everything down. With a yell of, "Let's go," Fred, Scooby, and Shaggy ran out from behind the protection of the boxes, making as much noise as possible. The larger metallic creature, alerted by the movement, began to chase them, its claws scraping the floor with fury. The small robots also turned towards them, forming a metallic wave. Meanwhile, Velma and Daphne sneaked around, taking advantage of the distraction. Velma observed the circuits and cables, trying to discern which was the main circuit breaker. "It has to be this one," she murmured, pointing to a large red switch. "All right, Fred, now!" Velma shouted. Fred, who was running in circles with Scooby and Shaggy, signaled with his hand. Velma pulled the switch. With a loud hum, the red lights went out, and the sound of the robots silenced. Total darkness swallowed the room again, followed by an eerie silence. "Did it work?" Daphne whispered in the dark. "Not completely," Velma replied. "We shut down the main power, but there's still something. I feel a vibration, and these smaller robots seem to have backup batteries." Suddenly, glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness. They were the eyes of the small robots, which began to move again, though more slowly and erratically. The larger robot also seemed to be reactivating, with a low, intermittent hum. "They don't just rely on grid power," Fred exclaimed. "They're connected to a portable power source or something deeper." Velma thought fast. "We need an electromagnet. Or something that can disable their circuits. Where is there a secondary control room?" Suddenly, a trail of shimmering green light appeared in the air, floating slowly. It was the translucent figure of the lady of the underwater castle, who seemed to be reacting to the presence of the robots. She floated towards the larger metallic robot, extending her ethereal hand. An intense greenish glow emanated from her palm, and the larger robot stopped, its red lights flickered rapidly and then went out. "She deactivated them," Daphne exclaimed, surprised. Scooby and Shaggy came out from behind Fred, their eyes wide. "The lady. She's good," Shaggy squeaked. The translucent figure then turned to them, and Velma could see her glowing eyes more clearly. "It's not a ghost," Velma said. "It's a holographic projection. A very advanced one." The projection of the lady of the underwater castle then gestured towards a hidden panel on the wall, which had previously been camouflaged by the darkness. As they approached, they noticed a small device on the floor, vibrating softly, emitting an energy field that disabled the robots. "A signal interference device," Velma exclaimed, picking it up. "That explains why the resort systems were failing. And why the robots stopped working." The lady's projection then began to move again, floating towards a narrow tunnel, which hadn't been noticed before. She seemed to be indicating the way. "I think she's showing us the way to our villain's rat nest," Fred said, determined. They squeezed through the tunnel, which seemed to lead even deeper into the resort's bowels. The air grew more humid, and the sound of water was more audible. As they advanced, they noticed that the tunnel walls were made of natural rock, mixed with some concrete sections. "Looks like we're approaching something ancient," Daphne observed. "Something that isn't part of the modern resort." The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, illuminated by a greenish-blue light coming from large cracks in the rocks, revealing the ocean water outside. In the center of the chamber, there was a series of high-tech equipment, flickering monitors, and cables extending into the rock. And there, hunched over a control panel, was a hooded figure, their back turned to them. "What is that?" Fred whispered. "Our ghost's lair," Velma replied. "And he's right here." The hooded figure seemed to be manipulating something on the panel, and then, a familiar noise echoed through the chamber. It was the mechanical hum of the small robots, which began to emerge from hidden niches in the rocky walls, all converging on the hooded figure, like a silent army. The projection of the lady of the underwater castle flickered, seemingly concerned. "I think we've been discovered," Shaggy whispered, and Scooby let out a "Roo-row." The hooded figure slowly turned, and the greenish-blue light of the chamber revealed an aged face, with shrewd eyes and a dark smile. It was Mr. Bartholomew Higgins, the same man who had begged them to solve the mystery. "Well, well, I see you're more perceptive than I imagined," Higgins said, his voice now cold and calculating. "But you've come to the wrong place at the wrong time." The revelation of Mr. Higgins as the mastermind behind the ghosts came as a shock. The desperate man who had greeted them at the port now revealed himself to be a calculating villain, manipulating everyone with his web of illusions. Scooby and Shaggy, who had stopped running for a moment, hid behind Fred again. "Mr. Higgins. But why?" Daphne exclaimed, perplexed. "You own the resort. Why haunt it?" Higgins laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed through the chamber. "Owner? Yes, I am. But my goal was never just to have a resort. Aquatlantis is just a facade. A smoke screen for my true treasure." He gestured to the cracks in the rocks, from where the greenish-blue light emanated. "You are in the heart of Blackwood Castle, detectives. Or what's left of it. And, more importantly, in the heart of my true project." Velma, her glasses pushed up on her nose, looked at the equipment and the rocky walls with a new understanding. So, Blackwood Castle didn't completely sink. Some parts were preserved, buried under the seabed, and you incorporated them into the resort structure. "Exactly." Higgins exclaimed, his eyes gleaming with maniacal excitement. "And not just the structures. Lady Eleanor Blackwood was a true genius. Her diaries and notes, found in the castle ruins, revealed designs for technology far beyond her time. Clean energy, propulsion, and even, advanced holography. The Lady of the Underwater Castle is a projection based on her designs." Fred exclaimed, putting the pieces together. "You used her to scare people, to make them think the place was haunted, and thus devalue the resort's shares." "Bingo, Mr. Jones." Higgins sneered. "The resort was doing too well. Too many people, too much publicity. I needed a way to drive away the curious, lower the share value, then buy them back for next to nothing and have full control. The legend of Lady Eleanor was perfect. No one would suspect a ghost. But what about the robots? And the metallic monster?" Daphne asked, still a little scared. "Ah, those are my private security guards," Higgins replied, gesturing to the small robots that were now slowly approaching. "They ensure no unwanted person gets near my true project." "The big one?" "A kind of automated excavator prototype, based on Eleanor's designs. It was in security mode, detecting intruders and trying to scare them away." Velma pointed to the flickering monitors. "What are you building here, Mr. Higgins? And why the secrecy?" Higgins smirked. Lady Eleanor wasn't just an inventor. She was also an alchemist. Her diaries mention a secret chamber in the castle, where she supposedly kept one of her greatest discoveries, a rare mineral with incredible energetic properties. It could power entire cities, or even, something much bigger. "A mineral with energetic properties?" Fred repeated, frowning. "Like, an unlimited energy source?" "Exactly." Higgins exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table. "And with the use of my excavation technology, based on Lady Eleanor's designs, I finally managed to locate it. It's just a few meters from here, inside the rock." He pointed to a sensor that showed a large glowing mass within the rock. "And it's almost ready to be extracted. With this mineral, I will be the most powerful man in the world. The Aquatlantis resort will be just a detail in my ascent." The small robots, which had previously been deactivated by Velma's interference device, began to hum and reactivate, bypassing the Lady of the Castle's projection, which seemed powerless against them. Higgins had adjusted the frequency to nullify the device's effect. "It's useless, detectives. You're trapped. My robots will take care of you while I finish my work," Higgins said, his eyes fixed on the sensor. The small robots advanced, their tiny claws extended, while the projection of the lady of the underwater castle floated around, seeming to emit a more intense glow, as if trying to communicate. "We have to stop him," Fred said, looking around. "Daphne, try to find something to block the robot's passage. Velma, look for a weak point in his controls." Shaggy and Scooby, instead of running, cowered behind a large machine, which seemed to be a kind of compressor. Scooby, sniffing, noticed a familiar smell coming from inside the machine. It was the smell of Scooby snacks. Someone had left a package there. Scooby snacks. Scooby barked softly, his eyes shining. Shaggy, who was so scared he could barely think, looked at the biscuits and the approaching robots. A crazy, but potentially effective, idea began to form in his mind. While Fred and Daphne tried to set up an improvised barrier with boxes and equipment, Velma was hunched over Higgins' monitors, trying to understand how his system worked. She noticed a pattern in the data, a kind of intermittent energy flow that Higgins was using to activate his robots and the holographic projection. "Mr. Higgins, you're overloading the resort's power system," Velma warned. "If you continue like this, you could cause a collapse of the entire structure." Higgins laughed. "Small sacrifices for great rewards, Miss Dinkley. The resort's stability is insignificant compared to the power I'll have with the mineral." The projection of the lady of the underwater castle floated towards Velma, and a strange, almost hieroglyphic symbol appeared on her translucent chest. Velma recognized it from her studies of Lady Eleanor. It was the symbol of an ancient security lock that Lady Eleanor had designed to protect her most valuable secrets. "She's showing us something," Velma exclaimed. "A way to shut everything down." The robots approached, and the situation was getting desperate. Fred tried to push a large toolbox to block the passage, but the robots were small enough to pass underneath. It was then that Shaggy had his idea. "Scooby, old pal, time for emergency plan, edible diversion." He opened the package of Scooby snacks and threw a handful of them towards the robots. The small automatons, which seemed to have some kind of heat sensor, briefly diverted from their trajectory, sniffing the biscuits. It was a minimal distraction, but it was enough to give Velma a crucial moment. Velma, following the lady's projection's lead, quickly looked for a sequence of buttons on the control panel that matched the symbol. Her fingers flew over the controls, trying to deactivate Higgins' system. Higgins, realizing what Velma was doing, shouted, "No. If you touch that, you'll deactivate everything. The mineral will be lost forever." But Velma was focused. She found the correct sequence and pressed the buttons. A loud alarm blared, and the chamber lights flickered wildly. The projection of the lady of the underwater castle shone intensely and then dissolved into the air. The robots stopped abruptly, their lights going out, and the hum ceased. The larger robot, which was trying to reactivate, emitted a last hiss and also became inert. Higgins let out a cry of frustration. "No. My years of work. Destroyed." Fred ran to Higgins and, with a quick movement, immobilized him. "I think the only thing destroyed here is your plan, Mr. Higgins." The chamber, now silent, revealed the scene of a grand and dishonest operation. The mineral, however, was still there, glowing within the rock, but now inert and useless to Higgins. "We did it!" Daphne exclaimed, relieved. "At least a part of it," Velma corrected, looking at the control panels. "I deactivated Higgins' main power system, but that also deactivated the structural stabilization in some parts of the resort. We need to get out of here before something worse happens." They heard a cracking sound coming from the rocky walls. The ocean's water pressure was starting to take its toll. "What was that?" Shaggy asked, trembling. "I think the lady of the underwater castle gave us a final helping hand," Velma said. "She deactivated the lock that kept the chamber stable. It's our way out." The sound of cracking in the cavernous chamber walls was undeniable, and Velma's warning echoed in their minds. The deactivation of Higgins' power system, though crucial to stopping him, had also compromised the structural integrity of the area. The ocean pressure, previously contained by the resort's engineering and the geology itself, was beginning to exert its force. "We need to get out of here, and fast," Fred exclaimed, tying Higgins' hands with a loose cable he found. The defeated villain grumbled obscenities about his lost treasure. Daphne looked at the crack in the rock from where the greenish-blue light emanated. Water was starting to trickle in thin streams. "The tunnel back is on the other side. Will it hold?" Velma quickly scanned the resort map on her tablet, which was now working again, though with a weak signal. "The lady's projection showed us the way to this chamber, and now, she's given us the key to get out. The crack must be the escape route. It seems to be a natural tunnel that connects to a secondary service area of the resort." "A natural tunnel?" Shaggy squeaked. "It's definitely going to have sea monsters, Fred. Like, giant octopuses with diving goggles." Scooby, who was still savoring the rescued Scooby snack, let out a worried bark. Fred tried to remain calm. "We have no choice, gang. It's our only way out. And with Higgins disabled, he can't send any more robots after us." With Higgins firmly tied up, they followed Velma towards the crack. The tunnel that opened in the rock was narrow and damp, with slippery algae covering the walls. The sound of dripping water was constant, and the air was heavy with humidity. This wasn't the part of the resort tour the brochure promised," Shaggy mumbled, slipping on a wet rock. Fred turned on his cell phone's flashlight, illuminating the way. The tunnel seemed to lead downwards, on a steep descent. With each step, the water pressure became more noticeable, and they could hear the distant hum of the resort's ventilation systems, which were still working. Suddenly, a loud cracking sound echoed through the tunnel. A large portion of the rock above them broke off and fell, blocking the way they had come from. "The chamber is collapsing," Daphne exclaimed. Higgins, tied up, laughed hysterically. "Fools! You've sealed your own fate. The castle, even in ruins, claims its intruders." Velma ignored Higgins. "We have to keep going. The tunnel should stabilize further ahead, or connect to a safer area." They moved faster, almost sliding through the dark passage. The air began to smell of mold and salt, and the sound of the ocean became closer, not just dripping, but a muffled roar, as if the depths of the sea were breathing around them. Then, the tunnel opened into a smaller, more stable chamber, which seemed to be an old storage area of Blackwood Castle. There were stacked wooden crates, some corroded by time and salt water, and rusted tools scattered on the floor. In the center of the room, there was an opening in the ceiling, through which a faint light entered, revealing a rusted metal ladder climbing towards the top. "A service hatch!" Fred exclaimed. "That should lead us to a higher, safer part of the resort." They began to climb the ladder, with Scooby and Shaggy stumbling and slipping on each rung, complaining about the smell of damp old stuff. Higgins, still tied up, was forced to climb with them, grumbling and cursing with every step. Upon reaching the top, Fred tried to open the hatch, but it was stuck. "It's blocked by something heavy." Velma examined the hatch. "It looks like corrosion and time have done their job. We need some tool to force it open." It was then that a loud impact sound echoed from the chamber below them. A part of the ladder collapsed, and they almost fell back into the tunnel. The structure of Blackwood Castle was deteriorating rapidly. "We have to open this, and now," Daphne exclaimed, feeling the urgency of the situation. Fred looked around and saw a heavy metal lever, part of an old winch mechanism, leaning against the wall. "I'll try to use this as a lever." While Fred struggled to position the lever and force the hatch open, Velma looked at the rubble in the chamber below. She noticed something shining among the debris. It looked like part of a crystal. It was the mineral Higgins was looking for, now broken and without its characteristic glow. "His power source is deactivated," Velma murmured. "And it seems Blackwood Castle is finally succumbing to time." With a loud creak, the hatch finally gave way, opening into a dark room. Fred, exhausted, panted. "We made it." They climbed into the room, which appeared to be a disused storage area, with dusty boxes and old equipment. In the back, a metal door opened to an illuminated corridor of the Aquatlantis resort. They were back in civilization, or almost. "We're saved!" Shaggy exclaimed, hugging Scooby. But the celebration was short-lived. As soon as the team passed through the door, a piercing alarm sounded throughout the resort. Red emergency lights began to flash in all corridors, and a computer voice echoed through the loudspeakers, "Critical pressurization alert in underground areas. Immediate evacuation of all sectors. Repeat, immediate evacuation." "What's happening now?" Daphne asked, scared. Velma, consulting her tablet, realized the seriousness of the situation. "My deactivation of Higgins' system destabilized the resort's foundation. If the old parts of the castle collapse, they could compromise the Aquatlantis foundations. The entire resort is in danger of sinking." Higgins, though tied up, smiled cynically. "I told you. This castle is cursed. No one can disturb its secrets without paying the price." Fred, ignoring Higgins, thought fast. "We need to warn Mr. Higgins about the imminent danger. He might be behind everything, but he doesn't want his own resort to sink." "He's tied up," Daphne reminded. "What if he tries something?" "He has no way to escape from here," Velma replied. "But we need an escape route for everyone. The upper part of the resort should still be safe. We have to reach the escape elevators." Panic began to take hold of the guests and employees who ran through the corridors, following instructions to the emergency exits. The luxurious Aquatlantis resort was turning into a sinking ship. As they ran through the corridors, the floor began to subtly shake. With each step, the danger became more real. They found themselves amidst the crowd of frightened guests, some crying, others trying to call their families. Zoinks! "It's like the Titanic, only underwater," Shaggy exclaimed, clutching Scooby to him. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and a familiar holographic projection appeared ahead. It was the lady of the underwater castle, but this time, she seemed more solid, almost real, and her expression was one of urgency. She pointed to a different path, a less frequented corridor that led to a secondary service area. "She's showing us a shortcut," Velma exclaimed. "A way to the elevators that isn't so congested." The team ran, following the ghostly projection. The lady of the castle floated ahead, opening doors and showing the way, as if guiding them to safety. Higgins, still tied up, seemed shocked to see the projection. This isn't possible. She shouldn't react to this," he muttered, his eyes wide. "Looks like Lady Eleanor still has some tricks up her sleeve, Mr. Higgins," Fred said, as they ran. They finally reached the escape elevators, which were overcrowded, but the lady of the castle guided them to a service elevator, which was empty. They quickly entered, and the lady of the castle, before disappearing, made a final gesture towards Velma, as if conveying a last message. The elevator began to ascend rapidly, and through the windows, they could see the Aquatlantis resort. The cracks in the walls of the older section of the castle were widening, and ocean water was pouring in large volumes. "Close call," Daphne said, breathing heavily. "But there's still a mystery," Velma pondered, looking at the last image of the lady of the castle in her mind. "It seems the true Lady Eleanor was more than just an inventor. And her projection, why did she help us? Something doesn't fit." The escape elevator emerged on the surface, opening into the dazzling sunlight and fresh ocean air. The Mystery Incorporated team was greeted by a crowd of journalists, rescue teams, and, to Scooby and Shaggy's relief, an improvised snack stand. Chaos was evident, but the evacuation seemed to have been successful, thanks to the early warning. Mr. Bartholomew Higgins was promptly handed over to the authorities, who took him into custody, still grumbling about his lost treasure. The police and engineers began to investigate the damage to the Aquatlantis resort, which now looked like a technological marvel in trouble, with the older parts of Blackwood Castle visibly cracked and starting to give way. While Scooby and Shaggy comforted themselves with fish sandwiches and French fries, Velma was hunched over her tablet, revisiting the images of the Lady of the Underwater Castle's projection. The last message she had conveyed to Velma continued to intrigue her. That projection. It was different, Velma murmured. It wasn't just a pre-programmed hologram by Higgins. It seemed to have a level of consciousness, or at least, a reactivity that went beyond a simple loop. Fred, observing the partially submerged resort in the distance, pondered, "Do you think the real Lady Eleanor had an artificial intelligence system, Velma? Something she programmed before the castle sank?" "It's a possibility," Velma replied thoughtfully. "If her diaries spoke of advanced technology, perhaps she created something to protect her secrets, or even to interact with the outside world in some way. The Lady of the Castle's projection seemed to be guiding us, helping us stop Higgins." Daphne, who was talking to one of the resort's engineers, returned with troubling news. "The engineers say the Blackwood Castle structure is crucial to Aquatlantis stability. If the collapse continues, the entire resort could sink completely." Shaggy, who overheard the conversation, choked on his sandwich. "So, the ghost of the Lady of the Castle saved us, only for the entire resort to become a sunken city?" Velma stood up, her eyes determined. "We can't let that happen. If Lady Eleanor's projection is intelligent, she may have left a clue, a plan B, to prevent a greater catastrophe. We need to go back there." Fred looked at the resort with apprehension. "Go back? With it collapsing?" "It's the only way to discover the truth about Lady Eleanor and perhaps save Aquatlantis," Velma insisted. "The projection showed me a symbol, a kind of seal. I saw something similar in the reports about the resort's emergency system." The team, reluctant but confident in Velma's keen insight, agreed. They convinced one of the rescue engineers to take them back to Aquatlantis in a mini-research submarine, explaining that there might be key elements to stabilize the collapse. The descent was faster this time, and the sight of the partially damaged resort was grim. Water had already invaded some of the lower sections, and the sound of cracking and groaning was constant. They went straight to the resort's main control room, which was still accessible and partially functional. The engineers had evacuated the area, but some monitors were still flickering, displaying pressurization and structural integrity data. Velma approached one of the control panels, looking for the symbol that the lady's projection had shown. She found it, a small gear-shaped icon, with an almost imperceptible glow. "Here," she exclaimed. "It's an emergency containment system. It seems Lady Eleanor designed something to stabilize the castle in case of structural failure. Higgins never knew about it, or ignored it." Daphne, Fred, Scooby, and Shaggy approached, watching as Velma typed a sequence of commands. "Ruro, what's that?" Scooby barked, pointing to a monitor. A schematic map of Blackwood Castle and the underwater resort appeared on the screen. And, in the center of the map, a pulsating light. It wasn't the mineral Higgins was looking for, but something different. "It's an energy containment chamber," Velma explained. "Lady Eleanor not only designed the projection, but also a system to contain the natural energy of the ocean and use it to stabilize the structure. Higgins was trying to use the mineral as an unlimited energy source for his own purposes, but the true power lay in Eleanor's engineering." Velma continued to type, trying to activate the containment system. The projection of the Lady of the Underwater Castle reappeared in the air, shimmering softly beside her, as if helping. This time, her eyes seemed to emit a calm and serene light. "She's showing me the access codes," Velma said, excited. "It's like she's guiding me from beyond." As Velma typed the codes, the floor shook violently. A huge crack opened in one of the control center's glass walls, and water began to gush in. "Velma, quick!" Fred yelled, pulling Daphne and himself away from the flood. Scooby and Shaggy, terrified, climbed onto a control panel, trying to stay dry. Velma continued to type, her fingers flying over the keyboard, ignoring the rapidly rising water. The lady of the castle's projection floated directly in front of her, the symbols flickering faster. With a final click, Velma completed the sequence. A loud hum filled the room, and the main monitor lights came on, displaying a stability graph that began to rise rapidly. The water flow from the crack diminished, and the trembling stopped. It worked! Velma exclaimed, relieved. The containment system is activated. Lady Eleanor stabilized the castle and resort structure. The projection of the Lady of the Underwater Castle glowed intensely one last time, and then, with a soft fade, disappeared completely, leaving behind only a sense of peace. "She's gone," Daphne said, with a hint of melancholy. "Not completely," Velma replied, looking at the control panel. "Her legacy continues. The system she created is now protecting the resort. She was more than an inventor, she was a guardian." Fred looked at the crack in the wall, which now seemed to be sealing itself, the microfissures closing as if by magic. So, the ghost was actually a technological guardian angel. The control room, once flooded with chaos, was now in an almost reverent silence, broken only by the gentle hum of the energy containment systems that Velma had activated. The water gushing from the crack in the wall had diminished to a trickle, and the resort's trembling had ceased. Aquatlantis, though still in need of repairs, was safe. Fred, Daphne, Scooby, and Shaggy approached Velma, who was still mesmerized by the screen, observing the stability graphs. "So, the resort is saved?" Shaggy asked, his voice full of hope. "Yes," Velma replied, a satisfied smile appearing on her face. "Thanks to the true ingenuity of Lady Eleanor Blackwood. She designed an underwater geothermal system, using the heat energy from the Earth's core to generate a stabilizing force. The robots and the projection that Higgins used were just a minor part of her system, used for defense and communication. The mineral he was looking for was just a catalyst for a larger project, but not the true power source." Daphne looked at the glass wall, where the ocean stretched endlessly. "It's incredible. She was centuries ahead of her time. She didn't just want to invent," Fred pondered. "She wanted to protect the castle, and now, the resort." Scooby let out a happy bark, and Shaggy did a little spin. "So, no real ghost. Just a lady who was, like, super smart." The team left the control room, walking through the now empty corridors of the resort. The atmosphere of panic had vanished, replaced by an almost peaceful silence. The lights, though still in emergency mode, illuminated the way, and they could see the stunning ocean view again through the glass corridors. As they walked, Velma reflected on the implications of her discovery. Higgins was so obsessed with the idea of a material treasure that he ignored the true richness of Lady Eleanor's legacy, knowledge. She wasn't an alchemist seeking gold, but a scientist seeking harmony with nature. Suddenly, a muffled sound of laughter echoed from one of the corridors. They turned and saw Mr. Higgins, who had been left tied up in the control room. He was being escorted by some of the rescue engineers, who had untied him and were taking him to the surface. "You may have stopped me, but you can't stop progress," Higgins shouted, his voice still full of arrogance. "The world needs my vision. My genius." Fred just shook his head. "Your genius almost destroyed an entire resort and cost millions of dollars, Mr. Higgins. Besides trying to trick everyone with a ghost hoax." Higgins continued to grumble as he was led away. The Mystery Incorporated team continued their way to the exit elevator, feeling the satisfaction of a mystery solved and a catastrophe avoided. As they passed a large mural depicting the history of Blackwood Castle and Lady Eleanor, Velma stopped. "Look here," she said, pointing to a part of the mural that showed Lady Eleanor in her laboratory, surrounded by diagrams and prototypes. There was a small detail in one of the diagrams that resembled the containment symbol the lady's projection had shown. "She left the key to her own legacy in plain sight," Daphne observed. "It's as if she wanted to be discovered, but only by those who understood her true intention. Reaching the elevator, Scooby and Shaggy were the first to enter, already dreaming of a big celebratory meal. Fred and Daphne followed them, but Velma paused for a moment, looking back at the empty corridors of Aquatlantis. "The legend of the Lady of the Underwater Castle will continue," Velma murmured. "But now, people will know that she is not a ghost to be feared, but a genius to be admired. The resort may have started as a trap, but it will become a testament to true innovation." As she joined her friends in the elevator, Velma's smile was more than just satisfaction at solving another mystery. It was a smile of respect for a brilliant mind that, centuries later, still managed to inspire and protect. The Aquatlantis resort, once haunted by an illusion, would now be guarded by a legacy. The Aquatlantis resort, now a testament to Lady Eleanor Blackwood's genius, rose from the waters, not as a haunted place, but as a beacon of innovation. Higgins' revelation as the manipulator behind the ghost exposed his greed, but the true essence of the Lady of the Underwater Castle was revealed, a visionary scientist who left a legacy of protection and harmony. The mystery, once an echo of terror, became a whisper of admiration for the depths, and mystery incorporated emerged with the certainty that truth, however technological, would always prevail over hoax, leaving the ocean to guard its deepest secrets and its brightest legacies.